Okay. Well, we're gonna roll with it, which is good. All right. Well, I have noon. I'm very excited to get us started.
Let's go.
Yep. By quick way of introduction, I'm Alex Koper. I'm the CEO of MoXi, a global mortgage company. MoXi is on a mission to democratize access to global homeownership for the world and to make homeownership accessible to everyone across the world. And we do that by providing responsibly originated mortgage loans to people all over the world in their home currency. And we record the lien in the destination country, in this case, Mexico. So you want to just do a quick introduction, Nick?
Yeah, Nick Fong with Ronival Real Estate, broker owner. My wife and I started the company back in 2010, so we're coming on 15 years. We started as a mom and pop brokerage and grew it to the largest brokerage in Baja Sur. We have 112 agents currently, 11 offices. We're statewide. We originally started in Cabo, but the growth of and expansion of real estate to other parts of Baja Sur, La Paz, the East Cape, Todos Santos, has forced us to expand where our clients are going. And I can't imagine what it's like for you at MoXi being countrywide.
Yes, it's very exciting. I think it was probably about 18 months ago we amended our credit policy, so we now lend across all of Mexico, which is cool, and soon to be additional places. So yeah, and you just opened some new offices recently, right?
Yeah, we're now in the art district of San Jose. A few months back, we opened over there. That was exciting for not just the sales side, but also our management side, the rentals. A lot of our clients are in the San Jose area. I never thought about brick and mortar, but here in the Baja, there's still a lot of walk-in traffic, and ideally I would be virtual, but the market demands us to have more offices. So we opened an office in San Jose, and our 11th office is about to open this month in Loreto Bay.
Oh, congratulations. That's exciting. Lucky number 11.
Yeah.
I agree with you about the sort of distributed retail storefront presence. I think it's a thing in LATAM, right? Digital is an important component, but retail storefront is also important. Doing business in person is a thing. So, and Nick, I know you also have a division of Ronival called Ronival Developments. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, on the development side, I saw about 5+ years ago, with the lack of inventory and a lot of new developers coming into the area trying to address the demand for the market, that it was a different way to sell real estate. And so we set up a department strictly for developments, and we staffed it, from the marketing side, the sales side, the administration side. It's different, or there's nuanced differences, but it's in the details that you tend to get into trouble. And so without having a business model to address that, we wouldn't be able to grow the way we have. So we have several developers in Los Cabos, in Baja, that we represent all the way from Loreto down to Cabo.
Very cool. Yeah, that's exciting. I know that's been a significant part of Ronival, and I think a lot of our viewers today are probably really interested in the notion of pre-construction and the value you can get when you get into contract on a unit before it's ready, right? There's usually good upside potential there. So
yeah, if you talk the market, pre-construction or new construction, it's over 50% of our inventory. So if you're a buyer and you don't know how to navigate that and what questions to ask, you are going to get yourself into trouble, number one. But then two, if you just discount all the pre-construction, you have half the number of properties to consider.
Right. Good point. Good point. And in Baja Sur, like, what area would you say has the most pre-construction? Is that in San Jose, in Cabo San Lucas?
The corridor, and specifically the El Tesal corridor. So that's the mountainside of the tourist corridor, closer to the Cabo San Lucas side of the two towns.
I know a lot of MoXi team members live in El Tesal in and around that area. So there's a lot of development going on there, which is really cool. Awesome. Well, I know we've had our respective teams have done a lot of marketing of this event, and so there are a lot of questions that were sort of submitted in advance to us that we can start to walk through, and then I think we'll also have some comments that are coming live from our viewers, from our audience. But if you want, we can just get started on some of these pre-submitted questions.
Let's do it.
Okay, so tried to kind of group some of these together, but I think this is an interesting one. So is this a process, or presumably this means buying a house in Mexico as a foreigner, that requires primarily cash, or can loans be taken out? So I think this is a perfect one for this forum.
Yes.
Any thoughts you want to get us started with on that?
No, definitely. When I got started here 20 years ago, it was primarily a cash market. And we had a number of lenders that started lending to the foreigner market, Americans and Canadians mainly. And then the Great Recession hit and everyone left. And we had a period of time of several years where there were no lender options until MoXi arrived, which you originally were Global Mortgage. And we're very thankful that Global, now MoXi, is in the marketplace, because you're an option for our clients that don't have all the cash or don't want to invest all their cash in their real estate purchase.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're in some ways groundbreaking in that solution, in bringing reasonable and US dollar denominated loans and securing them with collateral in Mexico. I think that's a really important component of it. And when we were thinking about really getting MoXi off the ground, right? And this was like 2020-ish. So Global Mortgage had existed in it as a predecessor company. But prior to that, when we were, really thinking about how do we scale this, we did a lot of listening sessions, right? And we talked to like a lot of prospective customers, and we looked at the market overall. We talked to people like you as well. I know we've had a relationship with Ronival for a number of years, really to kind of try to find out, well, what are the most important aspects to, getting financing for your purchase of property in Mexico if you are a foreigner, right? And one of the biggest ones that came out of that was like, look, I'm buying a house in a foreign country, and so I really need to make sure that any financing solution that I have is not foreign, right? I really want it to be something that I can really understand. I want the process to look really, simple and easy. And I think that extends beyond just financing, also to the representation they have on the real estate side of things, right? Like working with somebody who understands and acts as that trusted advisor almost, right? In between understanding the local destination market and having the right expertise to be able to securely buy real estate in a foreign country, but also understanding where the buyer is coming from, right? And so we do that at MoXi as well, right? So for us, a really key component of this was offering fixed rate loans that don't have a lot of exotic features, and that are denominated in our borrower's home currency. So that's US dollars. And then you don't have any foreign exchange risk when you're repaying the loan. So it looks like we have a live question coming in. What are the qualifications for a loan as well as terms? You base qualifications on American credit score and debt to income. Yeah, really good question. Thank you, David. Thanks for joining us as well. So yes, from the standpoint of MoXi, to qualify for a loan, it's very, very similar to that which you might be accustomed to in the United States. We're going to look at your American credit score, or we're going to look at your income and asset picture in the United States. And we're going to underwrite the loan from a credit standpoint based on all of your home country income and asset documentation. So what does your credit look like? What does your asset picture look like? Do you have enough for the down payment? Those kinds of things. We use all of the same sort of underwriting criteria that from a credit standpoint that one would expect when getting a loan in the US.
Alex, how important was it for you in starting to mimic the underwriting process and the pre-qualification process to what our Americans and Canadians would find if they were buying a house back home?
Yeah. I think it was very important, right? So again, that going back to that listening session, like what's important, the product was important, but also the process and the procedure had to be something that our clients were used to doing whenever they, got a mortgage loan in their home country. And so we made that process upfront, pre-qualification, pre-approval. We mirrored that to the US process. Once you get into the actual legal property transfer from the seller to the buyer in Mexico, then it diverges, right? It's a very nuanced process and very unique. When you do it the right way, it's a unique process. But from the upfront credit qualification and getting a credit decision out to a client who's thinking about, making an offer on a home, that we do every day. It's a very similar process to that which our clients are accustomed to in the United States.
It's no different than when I first started selling real estate, coming from the States, being American. One of my competitive advantages was being able to relate the buying process back in the States to buying in Mexico. So you have to look at properties online, you have to tour the properties in person, you have to make an offer, you end up negotiating, you set up escrow, you go to the closing table, you do a home inspection, all those kind of things that you would do back home, and just trying to guide your client through that process and point out the nuanced differences. And that was really important for me in my business, and I've definitely seen it on your side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that people might not know, is that both Ronival and MoXi have entire teams within the business that focus on ensuring that these transactions close securely and in accordance with local customs, but also applicable law, right? I think that's a really important aspect of this, because the law is different for foreigners,
Right.
especially in a restricted zone like in anywhere in the Baja, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting point, Nick. So one of the other questions that was submitted in advance was about fideicomisos. How do you and your team think about guiding clients through the process with respect to that?
The fideicomiso, which is the real estate trust, the translation from Spanish to English, is a process that a lot of our clients coming from the US and Canada are very familiar with anyways. A lot of our clients are used to setting up a family trust or a living trust for survivorship, for mitigation of liability, and estate planning. So when they come here and we're able to explain to them that the fideicomiso is just a real estate trust, it's a form of ownership that you set up prior to closing, and we work, if it's a MoXi loan, you guys handle that whole process of doing that in addition to the mortgage. But then if it's a cash purchase, we work with attorneys that set up that fideicomiso so that you as the buyer have a legal entity that owns the property, much like a corporation. And the nice thing about that is the legal owner is an entity that you can put multiple owners in, and you can even divide the percentage of ownership on the property. And it is fee simple. It's not leased property. That's where a big misconception that a lot of our clients,
biggest one,
right? Because the fideicomiso is set up for 50 years. And so instantly our clients are thinking, oh, you only own the property for 50 years. No, that's just the legal entity is set up for 50 years. And then you can renew that in perpetuity. In fact, a number of our buyers are assuming the real estate trust from the seller, because I would say more than 50% of the sellers are foreigners. So they already have that trust set up. And you can save a little bit in closing costs by just assuming that trust, especially if it has 20, 30 years left. It makes sense. And it's a good bank that holds that trust as the trustee. So the bank trust is a great form of ownership and actually is the preferred way that most of our clients will want to set up ownership. It's just legally in Mexico, you have to set it up that way, or in a Mexican corporation.
Correct. Yep. Good points. I think the other thing that our clients often ask us, and I think to your point, many of our clients and yours, it sounds like as well, are pretty well educated on the need to use a fideicomiso as a foreigner when you're buying in a restricted zone. So anywhere near a coastline or near a border or both. But one of the common questions we get is like, within that trust, within that entity vesting, like, can you hold title in a foreign entity, for example, in an LLC, in a corporation? So you have the property trust, the fideicomiso. The property trust has beneficiaries. If you're getting a MoXi loan, MoXi is the first place beneficiary. That's sort of where the lien is attached to to secure the credit. If you're paying cash, then the buyer is the first place beneficiary. But in either case, that first place beneficiary can be a US registered LLC. It can be a family trust that was set up in the United States. It can be a corporation set up in the United States. The Mexican corporation would be a different a different instrument altogether. But I think that's another like kind of key point there. And then, as you mentioned, right, the fideicomiso allows buyers to set up contingent beneficiaries so that the property, the asset, can survive them, right? Which I think
correct.
Cool. All right. So we have some questions coming in live about MoXi programs. This one's from David. Is your required minimum down payment 35%? And what is the minimum loan size? Good one. Hi, David. Thanks for joining. So MoXi does require 35% minimum down payment plus your closing costs, which means you can get a loan from MoXi for up to 65% of the value of the property in a purchase transaction or in a rate and term refinance transaction. And maybe your next question might be, well, how do you know what the value of the property is beyond the purchase price? And so MoXi works with accredited appraisal vendors across Mexico who write what's called a commercial appraisal. While we're talking about appraisals, and I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole, but what's interesting also in Mexico is there's always a tax appraisal that's required. It's called a cadastral appraisal, and that's used for calculating primarily what will your new property tax base be on your property, as well as any sort of capital gains tax that's assessed to the seller. So anyway, but good question, David. 35% down payments required for MoXi programs. Now, minimum loan size for MoXi is the published minimum loan size is $250,000 US. So this is, we primarily work with clients who are transacting on property $350,000 US and greater. We do make exceptions on the minimum loan size. Maximum loan size at MoXi is $2.5 million US. So theoretically, from a value perspective, there's no upper echelon. So if you own a property worth $10 million US and you want to take a $2.5 million loan to purchase it or cash out refinance, that's something you do all the time. Jason is asking, hi, Jason, thanks for joining us. Do you lend on investment properties? And if so, minimum LTV? Do you apply short-term rental projections when calculating DTI? Very great question. So simple answer is yes. All occupancy types at MoXi, primary residence, second home, and investment property. One of the interesting parts about MoXi's credit policy is that we consider a second home occupancy to be any sort of time spent during the year. We don't quantify it with a minimum number of days where you have to certify that you're going to be there 6 months or something like that. If you plan to occupy the property for any portion of the year, it's considered or thought to be a second home at MoXi. If you do not plan to occupy at all any portion of the year and it's truly purchased for investment reasons only, that's fine. There's a small add to the interest rate for the occupancy. I think it's 0.35%, something relatively minor. The second part of your question, Jason, is about short-term rental projections. So MoXi doesn't officially have what in the US you might consider to be a DSCR loan or a debt service coverage ratio loan program, but we will use, if there is historical rental income for the subject property, or if you're refinancing a property and you have documentation to substantiate rental income, we will absolutely use that in the DTI calculation. But what's sort of interesting for those watching that are mortgage professionals, you'll maybe understand this more. In the United States, you can order a projected rent appraisal, or it's sort of a feature you would add on to an appraisal order that you might do in the US. In Mexico, rental income appraisal doesn't exist as a product. So it's hard for MoXi to offer that, sort of widely and across the entire product set. So that's why we rely on documentation about the property, historical records from Airbnb, anything really that the seller is willing to provide to you, that you could provide to us, that we can add that into the DTI in a purchase transaction.
Hey, Alex, I have a question. Earlier, you were talking about the appraised value. You always do an appraisal. We're in a market where potentially a buyer that we're working with can get a property below appraised value. Could that work in their favor for the LTV requirement?
It could be a compensating factor. It's a good question. It can be a compensating factor. Typically, like MoXi's credit policy mirrors that of a US non-QM lender. And so in the US, you use the lower of the purchase price or the appraised value. And generally, that's how we look at it from a credit underwriting perspective. This is where like having a really good agent though, Nick, comes in, right? Because if the agent representing the buyer is there during the appraisal appointment, has the comps ready, is able to show some of the key nuances and features of that particular property, right? And the appraisal comes in higher, that will be a compensating factor in loan underwriting. But generally speaking, we're going to use the lower of the purchase price or the appraised value.
And if someone does a purchase money loan, so they buy the property with you and they buy it below market value, you take the lower of the two, there's nothing preventing them, say, a year or 2 years later to doing a cash out refi. Is that possible?
Yeah, totally possible. Yeah.
To tap into that extra equity?
Yeah, absolutely. That's super easy to do. We do it regularly. I don't even think you need to wait a year or two, right? Theoretically, there are transaction costs, right? You have to pay notario fees and appraisal and the fiduciary fees and so forth. So it's often better to get purchase money loan than come back and do a refinance. But yeah, absolutely. Like we'll use the new appraised value. I think it's after 6 months, which is about how long it takes a transaction to record anyway. So yeah. Good question. All right. Let's go back to our list of questions submitted in advance, and then we can come back to the live ones. So can the mortgage be prepaid? I think this is a really good question because I know we get this one a lot. I think what the person asking the question, unfortunately, I don't have the names, but what the person asking the question is asking is like, is there a prepayment penalty? Can you pay down your mortgage faster than the term? And at MoXi, the answer to that question is yes. So there's no penalty for paying your loan down faster than the term length. And at MoXi, we offer flexible loan terms. So 15, 20, 25, or 30 years. Most of our clients choose the 25-year term because there's no difference in the rate between a 15-year and a 25-year, for example. A small addition to rate when you go from 25 to 30. But I would say probably 90% of the mortgages we write in Mexico are 25-year term lengths, all with fixed rates and no prepayment penalties. Okay, so Nick, this one is a bit of a stumper. We have a question about the traslado de domicilio. Do you know what that is?
Trust law domicilio?
Traslado de domicilio. This is also from Jason Frank. Thanks for your questions, Jason. This is a stumper.
I don't know what that's referring to.
Okay. I think some of the members of the MoXi team are probably watching this. So feel free, MoXi team, to chime in the chat. And the question is, can you finance the traslado de domicilio in the loan? I don't know, not familiar with that term. I'll answer it generally, though. As far as closing costs are concerned, you can include those in the loan. Dominio, traslado de dominio. But as far as closing costs are concerned, generally, is that the ISABI tax? Jason, is that the? Are you asking about the government transfer tax? You're saying it's the tax that you pay. So I'll just say this: generally, all closing costs can be included in the loan. At a high level, that's the answer, short answer. It is subject to credit policy with respect to like maximum LTV and those kinds of things. What many people maybe are often surprised of is the closing costs in Mexico. Nick, do you want to just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, the closing costs in Mexico are significantly higher than our American clients are accustomed to. On a cash purchase, it's anywhere, depending on the purchase price, 5 to 8% of the sales price. Depending if your sales price is higher, the percentage goes lower because there are a number of fixed costs involved in that. But the biggest line item in your closing costs is a 2% acquisition fee. And you were mentioning the ISABI, and that's exactly what that is. So as a buyer, you pay a 2% acquisition tax, and that's inclusive of the 5 to 8%. But then there's notary fees, there are appraisal fees, and all encompassing. So for, let's say, a $300,000 condo purchase, expect for a cash buyer about 15 grand in closing costs. So obviously when you're financing, there's more closing costs due to the financing, and you could probably talk more intelligently than on that topic, Alex.
Yeah, but I think you're right on, right? I think it generally you want to expect, we like to tell clients expect between 5 and 10%. And if your purchase price is really high, then it's probably on the lower end of that range. If your purchase price is lower in the $300,000 range, you're going to be in the higher end. Really financing or not, when you do it the right way, you have the transfer tax that's due to the government. You have the tax appraisal that's required by the government. There's all of these sort of required items that, when you're doing the transaction the right way and actually recording it, and you're going to walk away owning the property at the end of it, versus doing a soft closing or some other sort of.
The good thing is for the buyers, the biggest line item is that transfer tax. And when it comes time to sell, you do get a tax credit for that 2%. So that does come in handy for any capital gains taxes. So you do get a write-off when it comes time to sell.
Yeah, great point. All of those closing costs can be netted, or a lot of them. And Nick, isn't it true there's like some areas, I know we see this in other parts of the country, but there are some areas of Baja Sur where that transfer tax is higher than 2%, right? Doesn't it go up to 4 sometimes? Yeah,
in La Paz, the fee can be higher, and it came as a surprise to some of our clients. And to be honest, with the way transactions are and the changes in how they're being treated, it's not all the time. And it is important that when you get a property under contract, that you get a good faith estimate of your closing costs as a buyer. So your real estate agent will be educated to know different closing attorneys, so they can prepare that good faith estimate of closing costs for you. And if it's a mortgage with MoXi, I know you guys do the good faith estimates. And one of the things they ask is, what's the address? What's the tax ID number? So that you can give a more accurate estimate on closing costs.
Yeah, definitely. And as a financial institution, we over disclose, meaning we're giving you typically upfront, kind of a worst case scenario. And then as vendor invoices come in, usually we revise it downward more in the favor of the buyer. But we like to be very transparent about those costs, because sometimes they can be a big surprise. Whereas in the US, you might expect maybe 1% in closing costs as a buyer. In Mexico, it's multiples of that. So
now the flip side of that is our annual real estate taxes are far lower than most of our clients are accustomed to. So it's 0.1% as a general rule. There's always exceptions to that, but when you do a calculation, paying $1,000 on $1 million property in annual taxes, so over time of home ownership, you actually make that back.
You're in the money. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also, because we help clients when they're financing, we sort of manage the entire property transfer process, which includes hazard insurance, binding an insurance policy at the end. And what I've come to notice is that like hazard insurance in Mexico is also lower. So just like overall property costs are a lot less. Lower property taxes, lower property insurance premiums. The policies that our clients usually bind include more coverage than like a typical US policy would, and for a lower cost. So I think there's definitely a lot of, sort of benefits to offset some of that. And then to your point earlier, you have some deductibility of some of those upfront fees when you go to sell the property. So great question. I think this is one we got in advance, and we're also getting live. And this is I'll be happy to share a perspective from MoXi, but Nick, I think it's good for you to share your perspective as well. What about when you're a dual citizen? So if you're a citizen of the United States and or Canada and or some other country, but you're also a citizen of Mexico, how does that work differently?
I think number one, it depends if you're buying cash or if it's financed. So I'm going to assume in the case of a cash buyer, so if you're a dual citizen where you're Mexican and let's say American, you have the opportunity to choose. Do you want to set up the real estate trust, or do you want to put your personal name on the title? And if you are strictly concerned about your closing costs and your ongoing annual costs of ownership of the property, as a dual citizen, being Mexican, I would title it in your name as a Mexican, because you're going to save a couple $1,000s up front, and then each year on average you're going to save $500 in your trust fees. And then going deeper though, there are some instances where a Mexican national still will set up the real estate trust, the fideicomiso, for estate planning purposes, or maybe they own several businesses, they don't want the transparency of who owns the property, because when you set up that fideicomiso, the fideicomiso owns the property, much like a Mexican corporation would own a property if you set up the corporation to own it. So you have a level of invisibility, I guess, as an owner, where you have all the bundle of ownership rights in a trust, but you don't have as much liability. And so we do have Mexican clients that still set up the trust. And where I see it the most is our dual citizen Mexican American clients. They typically have an American spouse. And so it's the least common denominator. So if you want both people to be on the title, then you have to set up that trust, the fideicomiso, so that the American non-Mexican spouse can be on the title also.
Yep. Great points. I would agree with all of those. From a financing perspective, the way that MoXi records a lien for the mortgage is via trust rights on the fideicomiso. So in that case, when we have a dual citizen, we will, sort of insist on the fideicomiso. And MoXi uses a special version of that. It's called fideicomiso de garantía. Effectively the same type of instrument, just slightly different. And so there are some additional, sort of aspects to this as it relates to getting a permit from the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Many clients don't realize this is all happening because when you work with a great finance company or a great real estate agent, their teams are going to take care of it and make sure that it's sort of relatively seamless for you. But any purchase in a restricted zone requires a permit from the Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores, and they will, because the fideicomiso is designed, like by the Mexican Constitution, specifically to be for foreigners. It can get tricky sometimes when you apply for a foreign permit when you're not a foreigner. And so we work with those kinds of situations every day. So it gets fun. But from a client perspective, it's pretty easy.
And, that brings up a good point, Alex, is why for your second home purchase, and if you're a foreigner, why you want to be working with real estate professionals, because there's so many activities that are going on behind the scenes that if you're working with a non-professional, non-licensed person in your real estate purchase, there are a lot of steps that are going to go unattended to. And we hear the stories about people buying properties, or they think they're buying properties when in actuality, they just have a piece of paper that is a private contract. And that, although can convey ownership rights, legally speaking, you're not the owner of the property.
Yep. Very, very true. We see that all sorts of what we call common pitfalls. And unfortunately, we sometimes see them after the fact when a client will come to us for refinance, and our team will start the process of the cash out refinance. And then we come to sort of realize the client doesn't know either. We come to sort of realize that the client doesn't actually own that home that they paid for a couple of years ago, right? Still in the name of the developer or something like that because a soft closing was done. So I think to your point, it's really important. And soft closings are okay when you go into it eyes wide open and you know exactly what you're doing. But I think it's a really good point. It's so important to have good representation from MoXi, from a great licensed real estate agent, from a good attorney. Awesome. Okay. So one of our other questions we got submitted in advance is about construction and purchasing land. So from your perspective, Nick, any thoughts on that? And I can certainly talk about it from MoXi's standpoint.
Yep. I mean, the purchase of land has increased with the lack of finished inventory, and also clients that have already been owners of a condo or a house in, let's say, Cabo proper, and are wanting to expand into the less populated areas for various reasons. They want to be closer to the water. They want fewer neighbors, less traffic. And in doing so, the titles of the properties for land is more challenging. And that is something that we've learned over the years of opening offices in the East Cape, in Todos Santos, in even areas of La Paz, where the titles aren't perfected, so to speak, where there's some imperfections on the title and the measurements aren't right, the warrantability of the land. So I know MoXi goes through extensive studying of the property and the title to make sure that it can be warranted, that you can loan against it. And so a lot of people end up learning things about ejido land. And ejido land is the land that was granted to people, many families in the area generations ago. And it's not titled property, but people are living on it, people are using it. and people are selling it. But you don't get title unless you go through a legal process of changing that agrarian land into actual titled property. And so even more reason to work with a real estate professional, because these kind of nuances in buying land can be tricky at times. And you want to be able to, dot all the I's, cross the T's when you venture into areas where you're looking for vacant land to ultimately do construction on it.
Yep, totally agree. And what's interesting is there are even habitable residential properties that sit atop this land. And so one of like an ejido land with an ejido claim on it, or where the ejido wasn't properly registered or wasn't transferred properly in the past, and that could have been decades ago or centuries ago, even in some cases. And so I think that's a really good point, right? So like working with a competent professional on the real estate side, MoXi is going to do that on 100% of its transactions, right? So MoXi orders a title search from a reputable provider who is going to go get all of the land records from the public registry, Registro Público, and then they will issue an opinion. They will work with the title insurance company to issue a title insurance commitment. And what MoXi is looking for through our, sort of process with respect to property diligence is what we call it. We're looking for a title commitment without any exceptions. And that's really, really important. And we have had clients who have avoided some pretty, sort of nefarious situations by working with us, because we start this process, we order the title search, you get the results relatively quickly. It's about a week, 10 days sometimes. And it depends. In some markets, it's longer. And then, you can make an informed decision, but a lot of this is not necessarily disclosed up front on the listing or from the listing agent. So it's really important that you're working with a good firm or a good partner from that standpoint. Cool. From a construction lending perspective, this is a question we get a lot. And so I wanted to just touch on it. If you as a buyer are getting into contract on pre-construction property, meaning you are buying a unit or a home before it's built, you'll likely sign an agreement where you will advance funds to the developer, some portion of it at contract signing, some portion of it usually at roof on, some portion of it at substantive completion. And that is different than in the United States, where you don't advance anything to a developer until you actually, the unit is built and you've closed escrow. So MoXi will lend at the end of that process. So when the property is actually titled, when the condo regime is recorded, when the construction is manifested, MoXi will make that loan. So what that kind of looks and feels like is a bit of a cash out refinance transaction, but it's a purchase. So you sort of end up with this escrow overage, right? Because you've paid, let's say, 70% of the purchase price already to the developer. And MoXi is going to give you a loan for, let's say, 65%. There's extra money in escrow. That just comes back to you by wire transfer.
I'll comment on that, Alex. And in the last 4 years, with all the new construction in the area, that we were seeing that, and it was very nice that MoXi would give that credit at closing. But to be more competitive, just the way the economy is and the real estate market is, our developers that we're working with, they're more flexible in the payment schedule. Mm-hmm. So if they're doing a 65% loan to value on the condo or the house, that we're finding developers being more open to working with the buyer, because the buyer might only have that 35%. They're not coming up with another 35 or 40% during construction. So if you're a buyer considering new construction and you want a loan with MoXi and you're going to get the 65% loan to value, talk to your real estate agent, because a number of developers will work with you on that requirement.
That's great news. That's amazing. So that you can kind of just put up the 35%, maybe a little bit more to cover the closing. And then at the end, you get your mortgage. You're not out for 18 months, this large chunk of money that you then have to recoup. Great news. Love that. All right, next question. Finishing up on the construction side of things. So MoXi does not make construction loans. So if you were watching, I think we got this question in advance. If you're watching now and you already own a plot of land and now you want to borrow money from MoXi to build the home, that's not something we offer from a product standpoint today. But we will work with you when the house is constructed. And then again, really important, when you've manifested that construction, when the public registry who knows this plot of land as just a plot of land now knows it's a house, right? Then we will give you, if you've already closed on the land, we end up processing it as a cash out refinance transaction.
So I could see an opportunity there for people that own the land or are looking to buy the land to build with cash, because more times than not, your equity in is going to be far less than what the finished product is going to be worth.
Correct.
And so they can recoup potentially even more than what they put into the construction and
absolutely land. Yeah. Because at that point, we'll do an appraisal and we'll lend 60 or 65% of that appraised value, not of the purchase price of the land, but of the new appraised value. Yeah. So it's a great option versus selling it, maybe, let's say. Good point. All right. We've got a question about a project, it looks like. Obra Negra. Are you familiar with that project, Nick?
Yeah, so Obra Negra, that's like when the project is just a structure is up before they start plastering the walls. And so the question is, will you lend on a project like that, or a property that's, would you lend on unfinished property, or does it have
to be habitable residential property? As soon as it's less about, you have to have something there for us to appraise, right? That's the key thing. So it has to be done enough for an appraiser to come in and assess a value for us to use to underwrite. But the other bigger kind of component here is the transfer of title from the developer to you, the buyer, right? Because if MoXi were to make a loan prior to that point, it would be an unsecured loan. We'd have no collateral until we can record our lien via that fideicomiso right at the closing table. And you can't do a legal closing until certain things are done. Not necessarily the windows are in or the stove is working. More like if a condo regime is applicable to that residential land, has that been recorded with the public registry? And does the public registry, or does the cadastral office, the tax authority, know that this now was a vacant land and now has a house on it, right? Those are kind of the two main things, which is called construction manifestation. At that point, we'll make the loan. And if we're making a loan for more than you owe, we'll give you that cash back at the end. Okay. We are, by the way, for the last 4 or 5 years, focused on figuring out a way to do this. So we're a very, we really want to create products that are valuable for our real estate partners as well as for our clients and our mutual clients. And so we're regularly looking into how we can do this and trying to be as nimble as we can to try to meet that need and that demand. For now, we're doing it at the time that the deed transfers and where construction is finished enough so that we have something to appraise. But stay tuned for sure. There's a question in here about, does MoXi hold the loan or does it sell the paper? I think this is an interesting one, and one that's good to just sort of like let everybody know. So MoXi is not a mortgage broker. And I think there are some mortgage brokers that will arrange loans through Mexican banks to foreigners. Generally, those kinds of credit, those kinds of types of credit are loans issued in Mexican pesos, not in US dollars. They typically do not have fixed interest rates. They have, sort of graduated payment schedules. So when we sort of opened this call and I was telling you about the listening sessions we did 4, 5, 6 years ago and designing MoXi to meet our clients' needs, one of the things we learned was we want something that we can understand. So we want a fixed interest rate, 20-year, 15-year, 30-year loan, issued in US dollars, no prepayment penalties, no changing in the payment amounts due and those kinds of things. And so typically like a broker, you might see that kind of, if you approach a broker who's going to arrange a loan for you with a Mexican bank, it's going to not be as straightforward and it's not going to be denominated in US dollars. MoXi, so MoXi is an originator and we do hold these loans on our balance sheet. We also have investor partners that we, sort of trade the loans to. But one of the important things to sort of mention here is MoXi uses a subservicer, a U.S. mortgage servicer, who services regular mortgage loans in the United States. They also service MoXi loans. And so they mail statements out, when you have questions or you want to, anything you need, you call their U.S. customer service phone number. And the MoXi team, we have a servicing team in-house as well to make sure that your property taxes get paid and your hazard insurance gets renewed and your fideicomiso renewal happens and all of that. But this is a regular mortgage servicer who's going to report your mortgage payments to the credit bureau. They're going to send out a 1098 in case you want to deduct the mortgage interest or you want to try to deduct the mortgage interest that you pay in your Mexico house on your US taxes. Functions just like a regular, sort of mortgage loan. And that's by design. So
Alex, what is the advantage of working with a mortgage lender like MoXi versus a mortgage broker?
Yeah, well, in Mexico specifically, I assume you mean.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to the product availability, right? So a broker typically is, and I like to use the word arrange. Like it seems to me that a broker is arranging financing through the lender as this sort of third party. And that's typically done through a Mexican bank. And what we typically see is more exotic loan products that are not like the ones that MoXi offers. So at a high level, that's my sense. The other is just, and I obviously have a unique perspective because I live it and breathe it and work with our very capable expert team every day. We are squarely focused on quality. And I think our products and programs and the way that we're set up to help clients securely close property and own it and have reasonable financing on it is like a really unique aspect of what's available in the Mexican market. If we're going to make you the loan, we generally have a good sense that you're going to pay it back, and you generally have a good sense, and so do we, that the underlying collateral, what you're actually buying, is you're going to own it, right? And I think that's a really, it might seem like it's an obvious thing in the United States. In Mexico, it's not. And so when we make a loan to you, when MoXi makes a loan to you, we're looking at the underlying land. We're looking at whether you can get title insurance, whether it's insured. We're looking at, do you have enough homeowners insurance coverage in the event something happens, right? Like September, I know we're in October now, but September's a big hurricane season in Los Cabos. And if you are paying cash or you're not working with MoXi and you forget to buy insurance or you forget to buy the right coverage or whatever, right? Like that could be a risk for you. So I think a lot of clients, beyond the fact that MoXi offers US dollar fixed rate mortgages on properties in Mexico, a lot of clients work with us because they know we're going to diligence the property. They know we're going to work closely with their real estate agent and or their real estate attorney to make sure that the closing goes off without a hitch. And at the end of it, they securely own it. They are going to get interest reported to the IRS. They're going to, have their property taxes and fideicomiso annual renewal fees paid on time. the property will maintain hazard insurance coverage and those kinds of things. So I think that's another, kind of key advantage that MoXi brings versus maybe a mortgage broker or an arranger of financing elsewhere. Good question. Okay, I think we have a couple of minutes to take a few more.
I see a question here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you lend to Canadians?
Good question. The short answer is right now, no. We're in the midst of looking at that right now. So today, MoXi lends to U.S. citizens and U.S. permanent residents. Really, I think the key component is, do you file U.S. taxes? And if the answer is yes, chances are you would be eligible borrower. If you do not file U.S. taxes for now, although we are actively working on a program for Canadians, but for now, U.S. taxpayers with a U.S. credit score is one of the primary components of the borrower eligibility. Good question. I'm going to go back to our pre-submitted questions here. So we have a question from, actually a couple of questions from mortgage professionals wondering if they can broker to MoXi, which I think is a really interesting construct. We just soft launched a program that allows mortgage professionals to not broker, but to make referrals. And so we will pop up the link to that. It's a page on our website. We have a program for mortgage professionals, Mexico, as well as for developers as well, who are looking to MoXi to provide financing solutions for their buyers across all units in a project. And so we'll make sure we get those links populated here. You can learn more about those two programs by visiting our website. So we'll get that out shortly.
Alex, I have another question. Can MoXi loan to Mexican buyers?
Good question. So, and I see that. If not, why not? So, good question. And I think this comes back to, we kind of talked about this earlier. So the fideicomiso de garantía is the instrument with which MoXi secures its lien. By definition, a fideicomiso is a trust instrument, or that's the English translation of it. But a fideicomiso is for foreigners, right? And so you run into a bit of an issue from a vesting perspective, right? When you are when you're arranging a transaction using a fideicomiso for someone that's not a foreigner. So I think that's the easiest way I can say it. From a credit underwriting perspective as well, like MoXi is not equipped to pull Mexican credit reports, for example, or underwrite Mexican tax returns, for example. We do often work with people that have dual citizenship or who are Mexican residents. I'm a Mexican permanent resident. Many people on our team are, but I file U.S. tax returns, right? And so really it comes down to kind of those two items. We have worked with clients before who have Mexican citizenship or Mexican permanent residency, and who, from a credit underwriting perspective, that's past that sort of element, and then end up taking title in the name of an LLC that's domiciled in the U.S. or trust in the U.S., which is considered in the eyes of Mexico to be a foreign entity because the entity was set up in the U.S. And so that's like a very common way we work with Mexican nationals who are using MoXi. And sometimes that's just, maybe it's a group of people, maybe it's 4 different families buying one villa together. We see that a lot. And one of those families is dual citizen of Mexico and the US. So no issue. We're always happy to talk to clients and work through that. Okay. Great questions. I think we have like 1 more minute. Anything else we should make sure we touch on?
Not on my side.
Okay. Well, this has been so much fun. I know we have more questions we didn't get to. I'm scrolling up here. I'm also looking at the ones submitted in advance. Please make sure you reach out to either of us, to Nick or to myself. You can visit www.moxi.global for more information about MoXi, or Nick, if you want to talk about the ways clients can reach you at Ronival.
Ronival.com.
Ronival.com.
Yeah.
That's easy. But yeah, we really appreciate the engagement. Love the questions. This has been so much fun, Nick. Thanks for taking the time. And
thank you.
Yeah, look forward to the next one.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.